Welcome to Section 2. In this Section 2, we'll consider basic front-end code for interacting with your Django backend. We will cover building a basic React application and components, and we'll style it with cascading style sheets. We'll consider components data and state, and user interactions. We'll cover React routing and the URL query string, and then we'll consider how to test our React app, employing components for building your user interface. We'll be building our first component, looking at what JSX is, styling components with cascading style sheets, considering component reusability, and layouts with components and CSS. Let's look at building our first React component. We'll use the app.js and use this to build our own initial component. Firstly, we see the class extends component, which comes from React. It has a render method that returns what's inside these parentheses is JSX. We start with a div with a class name of app. We have a header with app header in there. Remove that content there, which was created by create React app, and instead we're going to return a paragraph with hello world. We need to close the paragraph tag. In JSX we need to make sure our tags are balanced. Now this is not updated because we're not running our development service, so we'll need to do that by going npm start. Now our browser has come up with hello world as per our component. React components render JSX. JSX is not JavaScript or HTML. JSX is synthetic sugar for JavaScript React.createElement call. You won't see React.createElement when using JSX because behind the scenes React converts JSX into these React create element calls. If you look closely, you can see that the parameters are component, properties, and then 0 to more children. JSX feels much like HTML, but it's been converted into parameters for create element calls. That does have a few implications that mean that JSX can't be considered exactly like HTML, but the differences are small. Now we'll look at styling our component with CSS. In Atom, in the source directory, we'll create a new file. We'll call this temp.css, which is now a blank file, and we can put our styling in there. Now looking at this class name, app, and class name app header, these will ultimately become CSS classes. We have to use class capital name in JSX because the word class itself is reserved in JavaScript. Class name is the same as class in HTML. So we can refer to these things div.app, the tag CSS class name, with then header as the HTML tag, with that app-header as the CSS class. We can use that as our selector, direct descendant with the greater than sign there. And now let's put some styling in here. Make a background color. Let's start off with grey. So our app header tag will have a grey background in our browser. Now with the CSS styled, we need to make use of this file. We'll go to index.js and import the CSS file here. And then React will make use of that CSS styling, which we can see in our browser with the grey background. React components are designed to be reusable. They can be imported and used by other components. So if we can write our components in a generic way, we can use them in lots of places. In JSX, components are like HTML tags. Their first letter is always capitalized, unlike say div or p or h2, which have the first letter in lowercase. JSX components are always capitalized, like capital A app or capital M my component. A component can use other components by declaring them in its render JSX return. We'll have a look at a practical example of how we can use components, and we'll also look to style our components using CSS. Picking up our example from before, under the source directory, we'll create a new file which we'll call comp1.js, and we'll put a component in here. We'll copy the definition from app.js because we'll modify that to suit in our first component. We don't need to install Grommet here. We'll change the name to comp1. It still extends component. It's a React component. We'll change the class name of the opening div to comp1 and change the text here to say that this is the first component. I am component 1. Get rid of the header tag, so we've just got a div and a paragraph tag in component 1. We'll copy all that and we'll create another file which we'll call comp2.js. Paste this in here, and this will be our second component. We'll change the class name to comp2 and the text to I am component 2. Now back in app, we'll want to make use of these two components. In app, it's a parent component. And the way we do that is simply use them like a HTML tag. Comp1, we'll close the tag, text, and now comp2. And this will use both of the child components invoked from the parent app component. We need to import comp1 from the appropriate file. It's in the same directory, so ./comp1.js. And the same for comp2. Notice that even though we're using Windows, we should still use / in the text there. We've got an error here, and the problem is we have not exported our components from the other files. So if we go to comp1, we need to add an export default comp1 to make that component available outside of this file here. Now the error is still continuing because we need to also export component 2 from comp2.js. So we'll do that. And all we need to do is save the file. Code has run, and we can see that both the components are rendering in the browser. Now let's do a little bit of quick basic styling. We can style using those CSS class names that we've defined on both of our components. We call comp1, it's class comp1, so we can refer to that as div.comp1. Let's give that a blue background, and we'll change we have to use color :white. So we'll have some white text on a blue background in the first component. We'll copy that for component 2, and that remains white. However, change the background to green. So we've got a blue and green. We'll save that. Let's go back to the browser, and we can see that both of the components have been styled by the CSS. Using class name as an attribute in our tags allows us to reference them in our CSS. CSS provides many layout options in modern browsers, such as Flexbox and Grid. We'll explore now styling our components, laying them out using Flexbox. Picking up from where we left off, we'll go to our app.js, and let's add another class name to div flex-container. Remember, there will be two CSS classes on this now, app and flex-container. We can refer to that flex.container in our CSS file to turn that div into a Flexbox. And we'll set it to display as flex, which turns Flexbox on, and we'll have the Flexbox wrap. We'll also have the flex direction set as rows, so the the Flex components will stack up in a horizontal basis first. That will get our Flexbox happening at a basic level. Let's have a look at that in the browser, and we can see our two components have rendered. They don't look that great though. Let's go to our CSS and make things look a little bit better. So using our two div selectors, let's give our first component a 50% screen width. We can see the first component's taking up half of the screen. And next we'll go back to the CSS and we'll give both of our components some margin. Let's start off with 10 pixels. Margin is on the outside of the component, so it's not going to use the background color. We can see our two components have now been separated. Now let's give our component some padding, so the text is not hard up against the edge of the component visually. So save the file and we can see that the padding has been applied to the components. Now let's give the second component some width. Now we'll give it so much width that it's forced over to the next line, which we can see on the screen. Let's change that to have it render on the same row, which we can see in the browser.